recording. Thanks everybody for joining. I have to say that it's really nice to be able to get together with you. I think if you can mute your line just to improve the sound for everybody, that would be great. I think we can all agree that it's been a rough set of weeks or months. Oh, is it me, do you think?
I don't know.
All right.
This is Eric. Do you have maybe two things on your phone and your computer?
It should only select one. I think
it's better now.
Okay. We just wanted to say, Monica and I, that we know that it's been difficult. You know, we feel for our friends in Puerto Rico, our family members in Puerto Rico. We understand that a lot of you might have friends and family members in Puerto Rico. Some of you might have also, you know, might know people in Mexico that are affected by the earthquake. It's been rough nationally as well, with things like DACA and just in general with the whole political landscape. So, you know, we debated about whether we should cancel or reschedule this conversation today in light of the hurricane. But we decided that now more than ever, it was really helpful to have time for the group, to have time for us to touch base, to see your faces, to hear your voices. Particularly, I haven't seen you in a long time, so personally, I really needed to, you know, to have this sense of community. And we'll miss our friends that are in Puerto Rico, but I think, you know, it'll be really helpful for them to see this video once we're able to share it with them. And to and you know, we encourage you to send them your thoughts and words of support and encouragement. We'll be sharing with all of you soon some ways in which you can help more generally with the recovery efforts. So you know, thank you for joining. We also think that this conversation in particular is very important right now, and it's important to talk about how you go on when things are really stressful around you and you're trying to do your work as a scientist, you're trying to get trained. You know, sometimes it feels like it's hard to you know, I feel very distracted today, actually. So persistence, the discussion we're going to have today is part of that. And we're very lucky to have three amazing scientists that have written and are, have designed programs and are experts in general in different aspects of persistence. One second, Monica, can you send Diana the phone number to call into the meeting?
I'm looking for it.
Thank you. So let me introduce them really briefly. We have Dr. Renetta Tull, who is Associate Vice Provost for Graduate Student Development and Postdoctoral Affairs at University of Maryland in Baltimore County. She is the founding director of Maryland's Alliance for Graduate Education and the Professoriate, which is an NSF-funded program, also known as PROMISE. UMBC is a national model for diversity at all stages, from undergraduate to graduate and beyond. And Renetta is a big part of UMBC's efforts in diversity. She also has had a lot of collaborations across the US and Puerto Rico on topics ranging from graduate school recruitment, retention, dissertation completion, faculty development. She has expertise. Her training is in electrical engineering. She earned a bachelor's from Howard University. and then a master's in electrical engineering from Northwestern. And then she completed a PhD in speech science. Before coming to UMBC, she was a postdoc, an Anna Julia Cooper postdoctoral fellow, and also an assistant professor of communicative disorders at University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's, you know, through Promise, the graduate program, she's really focused and moved kind of the needle on a national level on best practices for graduate student access, graduate program access, recruitment. And as I mentioned, UMBC is really a national model for best practices in this space. So welcome, Renetta. We also have Erich Jarvis, Dr. Erich Jarvis. He's a professor at the Rockefeller University and an investigator at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Erich is interested in mechanisms of learning vocal communication, and he studies this by using songbirds and other species that that learn complex behaviors, such as spoken language. He is, in addition to this fascinating area of work, Erich has written about his own personal trajectory in the sciences. He grew up in Harlem. As a high school student, he excelled at ballet, and he was actually going to the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, but he decided to go pursue his passion for science instead. He's written about this trajectory, and he's written about some of the challenges he personally encountered along the way. So he really has served as a role model for many, many students through his writing and his work. And finally, we have Kenny Gibbs, Dr. Kenny Gibbs, who is a program director in the Division of Training, Workforce Development, and Diversity at the NIH, particularly the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, and NIGMS. Kenny has a PhD in immunology from Stanford University. He's also a graduate of UMBC, so he has strong representation from that university. And after completing his PhD, he did a AAA Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, and he became really interested. He worked at the NSF on graduate education, and he became really interested in topics related to graduate education, to trends for graduate students and postdocs after they completed their PhDs, and topics related to diversity. And now at NIH, he really is leading the design of federal programs, federal funding programs, to train the next generation of scientists to broaden participation in research, and to promote basic research in general. So welcome, Erich and Kenny and Renetta. We're really happy to have you all with us.
Thank you.
Monica, I just want to check, is everything okay with the technology right now?
I think so. Yeah, I think I'll remind people, especially people who are on the phone, to mute yourselves on your phones. I don't know why there was some issue that even though you were muted on the system, it's not muted on your phone. So just mute yourself on your phones because there was some feedback. But yeah, otherwise I think everything is good. Okay, great.
So we wanted to get started by kind of framing a little bit the discussion we are going to have today, and asking each of our panelists in turn, what does persistence mean for them? What does it mean from their perspective when we talk about persistence in an academic setting? So we're going to start with Kenny. Can you tell us a little bit about persistence, what it means for you, what you can share with the group from your point of view and your work?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. First, two things. First, I want to say condolences to everybody as it relates to, again, the things that Giovanna was talking about. And I know many of you, probably all of you, have family on the island. So I just want to say thank y'all for coming to join, which I know has to be a hard day. And so thoughts, prayers truly with Puerto Rico and Mexico and all the things that are happening. Second, I work in the federal government. And so everything I'm saying are my own personal views and not those of the United States federal government, the National Institutes of Health, or NIGMS. Just Kenny giving you some advice as a citizen. So take it as such, please. And if you quote me, don't quote me as NIH Kenny. Okay, so now I'll say a few things. So thinking about persistence, I actually went to Google, being the millennial that I am, and I thought the definition there was good. It says persistence is firm or obstinate continuance in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. I'll say that one more time. Persistence is firm or obstinate continuance. You're continuing firmly in a course of action in spite of difficulty and opposition. And really, I think that does capture well the path for many scientists generally and scientists of color particularly as they're going through the career. And so as Gio said, I did my PhD at Stanford, at which point I then did AAAS policy fellowship, and then postdoc a little bit at NCI. But I've started a line of work really thinking about how PhDs make career decisions and what's the same and what's different across representation. So race, ethnicity, gender, the intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender. Really because I realized there were a lot of conversations around how to make things better, but not a lot of evidence around why any of us might be doing the things that we're doing. And so just a couple of highlights from that. Work that I've seen, may or may not be surprising based on where people sort out, but we look at how people's career decisions, what trajectories they're on at the end of their graduate school. And we see that compared to white or Asian men, men from underrepresented minority backgrounds, women from white or Asian backgrounds, or women from underrepresented minority backgrounds who've gotten PhDs are 36 to 54% less likely to want to continue on the big research academe track. And women of color from underrepresented groups are nearly twice as likely as all other groups to want to do a career outside of research. And that's when you account for things like mentoring, confidence about researchability, publication record, training pedigree. And so that really says that there's something that's fundamental and starting career interest. So it says there's something really fundamental happening during graduate training that's shaping where people go. And I say this just to say that that's the landscape. If you have those feelings, you're not alone. I also, and as a result of that, a paper that I published last year in eLife showed that there's a large and growing pool of scientists from underrepresented minority backgrounds, Black, Latino, Native American scientists, which is the thing I have to say frequently in DC when they say, oh, there aren't any. I was like, no, we exist. And so, but we see that there's a real disconnect over the last 30 years between the number of us that exist and then hiring at the assistant professor level, particularly at the big medical colleges that get lots of NIH money. And one reason for that we see is a difference in values, and that scientists from underrepresented groups disproportionately, but not exclusively, are really motivated by what you can do with science and the social application of science. And those are not things that tend to be valued in our research enterprise. But thinking about, how does one maintain that firm continuance on the course of action in spite of opposition? I think one, recognizing that there's difficulty and there's opposition, but also recognizing that you have choices. And so I know that grad school is not really an empowering time. Like you tend to leave feeling good about yourself, but I try to tell everybody, which is true, you're doing good. You're doing great actually, because you're on the path, right? And you're seeking out opportunities like this to make sure you get the community and development that you need. So I just want to applaud you for what you're doing. You're doing well. And I think really it's really important if you're going to stay firm is just maintain who you are. So understand what your values are and don't waver on them. There's a lot of pressure to conform. And so oftentimes our diversity efforts, we want people who look different but then think and act the same. But really science benefits from you being who you are. And so I just want to encourage you to know who you are, maintain the course, surround yourself with a community that will help you to do that, whether it's virtual, family, those sorts of things. And then I just want to make the point that even though there's opposition or resistance or challenges, there really is a path, right? And working in the government and a funding agency, I can see the path that if you're interested, there really is a path, and it will be hard, and your grants will get rejected. Many people's grants get rejected. I'm sure Erich can attest to that. But beyond that first initial hiccup or hard, and your papers get rejected, my papers got rejected, there is a path. And so oftentimes the challenges seem so big and so insurmountable as to not be worth it. And ultimately, you have to figure out what you want to be doing with your life and time, because we only have so many years on the earth and so much energy. But if you have that passion, don't let the opposition, name it, recognize it, name it, be with the people who can help you work through it. But just know that there is a path. I'm happy to talk more about that, whether it's community like this, thinking about getting involved in fellowships, programs like the IRACTA program, which NIGMS funds, which is a cohort-based postdoc model. There are resources at the NIH, people like myself, who are really happy to talk with. And one of the more fulfilling parts of our job is talking with people early in their careers to help them get on the path. There are things like the National Research Mentoring Network, lots of things out there. Twitter, I use it. So find the community you need. There's the path. And that's all. I'll stop there and turn it over to Erich.
Yeah, Erich, I wanted, I think it'd be interesting for you to reflect on, have you, when you were going through in science, did you encounter any of the situations that Kenny has described in some of his research studies? How was persistence reflected in your experience, and how did you find ways to deal with keeping a career in science?
So yes, I've read a number of Kenny's papers, and I encourage other people to do as well. And partly because I've actually identified with them. So yes, I did notice, and sometimes really not realize many years later, implicit biases against me that I wasn't aware, and that some other people not even aware that they have. And I did notice that there is an old statement that many families, my background, say you have to not just be as good, but be better in order to succeed as an underrepresented minority. And so how does persistence play into that? From my own personal perspective, I see it in three ways. One is you have to be persistent no matter what as a scientist, regardless. But as an underrepresented minority, sometimes you have to have even greater persistence to overcome hurdles that others don't feel. So I remember often feeling when I was a faculty member at Duke that I had two jobs. One job is to try to be the best scientist I can be, and the other job was to cure society's disease. And they expected, because of the color of my skin, I was able to do that. And that requires a lot of persistence, not that that should be my job. The other thing that I've learned about persistence is that persistence does not necessarily mean that you need to try the same thing over and over and over again until somehow it's going to become right. Persistence means also trying something different if it doesn't work another way. And that includes both in the laboratory as well as issues surrounding diversity. If you somehow can't, if people not understanding you because they have a bias against you, try something different to get them to understand. And then thirdly, I've actually learned persistence in my own past lifetime. You mentioned this, as a dancer, and I still dance. And to survive as an artist, to survive as a dancer, an actor, a musician, and so on, you have to have a lot of persistence. And so I was able to transfer over that persistence training I had as an artist, a dancer, into my science. And because of that, training to become an artist trained me to become a scientist.
Thank you, Erich. Renetta, I'll pass it on to you. How have you encountered persistence in your own experience as a scientist, and how do you how do you integrate it, or strategies to help students with persistence in the design of the graduate programs that you run?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here. It's an honor to be here. And for everyone who has family and friends that you're concerned about, I just wanted to, again, let you know that my thoughts and prayers are with you. As I said in the introduction, I have colleagues and a lot of programs also in Puerto Rico, and so it's sort of going to fit into my answer. Because I work with UMED, Universidad Metropolitana, with Mayagüez, with Rio Piedras. And so when I think about persistence, I'm really thinking about where are we persisting to, or what are we persisting toward? And that's really the thing that I do when I design programs. So when I think about institutional kinds of models, what kinds of things am I asking students to look toward, and are there pathways that are going to help them to get there so that they have something to persist toward, to go to. And so I usually ask my students, my mentees, what do you want to do? What are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? And what do we have to do? What kinds of things do we have to set up within the academy to make sure that you're going to get there, so that when there are pitfalls and when there are gaps, that there is something within you that will help you to not only be resilient against them, whether there are things that are racial or structural or just things that are part of the process, but things that are going to help you to persist toward those goals. And so two examples that I'm going to give you are two of my former students who are actually professors in Puerto Rico right now. One of them is associate professor of computer science at Rio Piedras, and another one is associate chair and associate professor at Mayagüez. When they were graduate students, I asked them what they wanted to do, and both of them said separately that they wanted to become professors and that they wanted to become leaders and women leaders. And of course, along the way, when they were students, there were so many things that were holding them back. There were people in the department at their various schools who said that they didn't think that they could move forward to even graduate to get their PhDs, or, you know, they had very close, one of them had very, very close family ties. And so there were people in the department who would say things like, well, if your family is so important, then maybe you should spend more time with them, or, you know, maybe consider not finishing to get a PhD. And there were all of these different things. And so reminding them what their goals were, those kinds of things help them to persist, to move forward. And so in my thoughts of what to do to persist and to move forward, I think it's very important to remember to have advocates, to have mentors and champions. And I always tell people you should have at least 5 people who are in your sphere, somewhere within your sphere, who can advocate for you when you're not in the room. Those of you who might have been part of GEM Grad Labs, the National GEM Consortium, or if you're a GEM Fellow, or you've heard of the GEM Grad Lab, there is one of the founders or former presidents, Dr. Howard G. Adams, who's in his 70s now, but has been a mentor for many people over the years. And he used to say things like, you have to have a big dog. And he really meant that you have to have someone who has enough authority and power, who will be able to speak for you and to assist you to move through certain kinds of obstacles, to advocate for you if those obstacles are in the way. So there are 2 things that are happening. You're going to have to persist through the program, be strong enough to say, I have a goal, but also to know that there are people who are going to help you to get there. And so when I design programs, I try to make sure that there are structures of mentors within the Promise AGEP program, Alliances for Graduate Education in the Professoriate. We have mentors in residence who come to our Summer Success Institute, and they are professors, sometimes vice presidents of organizations, vice provosts. We've had vice chancellors, deans, etc. And we need people to know that there are people who are supporting them, who are going to be in their corner. And we also make sure that there are opportunities for them to have small group discussions, roundtables at breakfast and lunch, so that they can develop relationships. So developing those relationships, having advocates, and making sure that you know what you're persisting toward, having a goal to persist toward. And it has to be more than just, I want to graduate and finish my PhD. It has to be something that, you know, you want to, whether it's something you want to do in the community scientifically, a position that you want to have, a level of power that you're going to have in order to give back, or a discovery that you want to make, something that you want to do within the science community. It should be something along that line.
Great, thank you all three so much. I think, go ahead, Kenny.
I just want to make one quick comment, because I want to, I think I loved everything that the co-panelists have said. I want to make a point that, just again, and reiterating, right? Like, because persisting is true, and like PhDs take 5, 6, 7 years. So it's also likely and appropriate that goals will change through that time, right? Like, and so I just want to say, because I know that, like, I was a Mark student. I was the only Black person in my whole building that wasn't a mailman or janitor at Stanford for 5 years that I was there. And so then sometimes there's that extra pressure, and then you can feel like you're letting down your people if you choose to do something different. And I just want to say, like, I want to try to just liberate you from that feeling, because you're already all on the path to being successful, and your best contribution is being true to your values and being successful. I just want to make a point. It can happen in lots of different types of academic settings, even if you don't see that reflected in front of you. But I just want to make sure people don't walk away feeling like if you do something else, which nationally 80% of us do something other than be a faculty member, that you're a failure, because you're not, right? Everybody loves success, so go be successful, and everybody will be so proud to show your face and say, look, I helped this person be successful, whether that's in government, in nonprofit, in academic research, in academic administration, in industry, philanthropy, whatever the case is. So I just want to, but again, at UMBC, Freeman Hrabowski always say, hold fast to dreams, and Langston Hughes' poem. At the end of my PhD, I had a conversation, and I was like, I don't have any dreams anymore. I just got to get done, because it was kind of rough. But I'm past that place now. So I just want to give you encouragement that, you know, if you choose to do something else, that doesn't mean you somehow failed to persist. You just grown. And as long as you're moving forward to your goals, because whatever your goals are is going to be challenged, that you're persisting and you're being successful. That's all.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, so you can get a sense of why we wanted to have this conversation. You know, graduate school is stressful enough as it is, and then add on top of that, you know, the stress of being perhaps the only student from your background in your program, of people not really understanding where you're coming from, you know, deciding throughout your training, which is a process of self-discovery, that your goals are not necessarily in line with those of your research mentor. It's all stressful. And so these strategies of persistence that you've been hearing from our panelists, community, mentors, you know, having time, personal time for yourself, really thinking about what your objectives are all really useful. So I want to open it up to the students. And I think Gracia and Carolina had thought about some questions. Gracia, I think you were going to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So good afternoon. Good night, everyone. I'm here trying to focus today. It has been a hard day for me, my family. All of them, they're okay for now. We're still hanging there. We still don't know about the people in the west area of the island, so that have me with some feelings still. So I have a specific question for Dr. Gibbs. You have studied the factors influencing career developments for PhDs, graduate students. Do you think that persistence or perseverance is one of those influential factors? And what influential factors can affect this persistence as well? And this question is, open to the other two panelists as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And if I understand you say that, is perseverance a key factor in continuing the academic pathway? Is that a good way to summarize the question? Okay. Yeah, totally. I feel like, I don't know. Yes, it is. So I'm trying to think about the best way to answer it. So the things that you see is that ultimately people choose their values, right? And so the more clarity you have on what's important to you, and values, so by values, I mean, what is it that you as a decision-making entity think is important? And not just that you think is important, that you're going to prioritize and orient your life around making sure it happens, right? Because lots of people say, lots of organizations, and I know we're being recorded, so again, me, not the government speaking. There's lots of values for diversity, but then there aren't commensurate structures to go along with enacting that value, right? And so it can be like I say, if I say I value the environment, but I'm not putting solar panels on my house, there's some discordance there, right? And so all this to say is that people figure out what's important to them and then move towards that. And that's the biggest thing that I see, because at a certain point, everybody has a PhD. You can you've accomplished, you can do lots of things. So values is important, in finding a space where your values can be enacted and where your values are valued is going to be a key to persisting, whatever it is, right? And so that's the thing that I encourage people, because lots of life is making choices, right? Like people, the only reason a person goes down this path is because they're choosing to, and they're stubbornly staying on the path. And I mean, you can say that for lots of decisions in life, even outside of science. So, yeah, and I mean, there's other factors like, because values can be work-life balance, it can be scientific contribution, it can be mentoring students, it can be needing to make adequate income, whether it's supporting family back home or supporting the people you have in your household, right? So yeah, find some place that allows you to express your values and you'll be good.
Do anybody, Eric or Renetta want to comment on the question? How is perseverance part of the, how can you nurture that as a graduate student?
So I'll give a little bit from my experience as a graduate student. Sort of in the sidebar in the chat, we were talking a little bit about family and embracing your culture, embracing family. And one of the things that I had to do in order to persevere in grad school was to really hold on to things that were part of my culture. And so when there weren't a lot of people who were part of my community, I had to go find them. And so I did that. And I was in Evanston, Illinois, which wasn't very diverse at the time, and it's still not. I've gone back to Northwestern to do some talks and have been just floored about how I even got there for grad school in the first place. When I look around and literally just see all of the, I'm trying to think, the best way to say it is, the financing. It's a very, very rich area in town. And so I look around, and I was giving this talk and sort of going up and down the streets of Evanston, Illinois, say, how did I get here? You know, how did I come to be part of this? But I had to escape sometimes on the weekends and go and connect with friends in Chicago. For me, I found a local church that was very helpful. And sometimes I even had to study there because I had to leave the university and get to a place that I felt was going to be nurturing. And so they would have people who had not had advanced degrees, but they knew that I was studying hard and working hard. And so they would encourage me and sometimes bring me a plate of dinner or something. And I would go to the Sunday school room and work and read and write, and you know, the pastor let me do that. And so having that community, escaping on the weekends sometimes to meet friends. I met my husband in graduate school, so both of us would try to escape together sometimes to go, and that was helpful. And then going to national conferences. So interestingly enough, I learned about Ciencia at Sabbath one year, years ago. And so going to your professional conferences, your affinity conferences, connecting with friends. I have friends that I met at SOCNIS years and years ago, at SHIP, at NSBE, like that. I'm an engineer, and I'm still friends with them now. And it's been wonderful because we started out as graduate students, and people are deans. And one of my mentors is the chancellor now at UC Davis. And so it's just great to have friends, to connect with one another. You have a wonderful community here. Connecting with each other, sharing with one another, sharing hopes and dreams, and helping one another. Later on, this can lead to collaborations and proposals. You all may be inviting one another to speak at each other's school, or you may be you may be asking someone to help with a company if you decide to be an entrepreneur, or recommending someone for a position. And so keeping that community close, connecting with one another, and not isolating yourselves. Those kinds of things I think are very, very important to persist and to be resilient going forward.
Yeah, I can add, I think Gracia's, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Gracia. Okay, yes, Gracia. I think your question is very good. And my heart goes out to your family there. And actually, one of my former postdocs is the governor of Puerto Rico, and Roselo. So I've been hearing stuff from there. So and my kid's mother is also from Puerto Rico. So I think you asked a very good question here that actually I think the organizers should think about for the future, because when I put a dictionary definition up there, but when I hear the difference between persistence and perseverance, I actually think of myself as being a person who has more, perseverance, because to me, perseverance does mean that you keep trying something that you know is difficult, but you're going to find a way to get around the difficulties. Whereas persistence gives me more the impression I just keep trying the same thing over and over and over again until finally one time it works. And so, I don't know, just saying to the organizers, maybe think about that for the future, to change the name to perseverance, because I think I like it better.
Words matter.
I like persistence though. I mean, the firm or obstinate continuance, yeah, no. I feel like they're different sides of the same coin. Whatever you're doing, keep persevering and persisting and being great.
Okay.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what people's thoughts are, in the future. But I mean, maybe take a survey of some sort.
All right, let's see. I've been missing some of the conversation on the chat, but if anybody has another question, feel free to jump in.
I have another comment or question for the panelists.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Do you guys think that too much persistence can become annoying at some point, or like too much persistence is, what's the limit when you have persistence?
Okay,
Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I think there is a balance. Yeah, you don't want to become a stalker of your professor, right? Or someone like stalks you. But I often find that underrepresented minorities and women, students, scientists, and so forth, tend to be less persistent about reaching out to me. They tend to feel like I'm bothering the professor, and that's not a good thing, because there's this respect for your elders, or those who are more advanced in their career than you. And so for me, actually, I find that the persistent student, or the perseverant student, is the one who actually achieves usually more, even if they're annoying at it. So I'm going to actually say, ratchet it up rather than ratchet it down for most students. And if you're really ratcheting it up too much, you're going to hear it from somebody. So you'll usually know when you hear it. And if you haven't heard it yet, then keep going.
So I wanted to go back to something that Dr. Jarvis said about persistence being something where you try it over and over and over and over again. And I started to think about that as he was saying it. So to answer your question, I think that if you are trying something over and over and over again, in other words, trying to reach a goal and it's not working, trying to convince someone of an argument and it's not working. In the same way with our science and our scientific method, if something doesn't work, then you try a different way. And I think getting information from sort of the community and getting advice and getting other opinions about how to go about something in a different way can be helpful, because you don't want to persist for the sake of just saying, I'm never going to stop, and it's not leading you anywhere. There are different ways and different pathways to get to a particular goal. And so sometimes, for example, a person might be in a class and they're trying really, really hard, and they have a professor who unfortunately is just not the best teacher. And so they're not learning from that person. And so they think, if I just try a little harder, I'm going to do okay. And then they keep getting these grades that are awful. And they say, well, if I keep just trying a little harder, it'll be okay. And it doesn't work. And sometimes you just need to drop the class for that semester, get information about who else teaches the class, how it could be better, maybe study the syllabus ahead of time in some of the chapters, and then take it with someone else the next time so you can move toward the goal. So when you think about too much persistence, sometimes persisting in the same way, if you're not getting anywhere, that is not always good. But still moving toward the goal at large, that's what you want to be able to do.
Plus one to what she just said. I think it's grain size. It might be how we're thinking about it differently. I think of the macro goal you're persisting to, but your path, your things you're doing to get there will definitely change and adapt. And I think doing the same thing, expecting a different result, is insanity, and that's not persistence. And it's not wise. It's not a good use of energy. So leave that there. And so far on my Twitter poll about perseverance or persistence is 50-50 with 4 votes. So I'm guessing Eric's one of the votes. So you can vote too.
Yes, I voted.
All right. Any other questions from the students? If not, I can always jump in. Oh, there you go, Carolina.
So before I just also wanted to say that Rocio, who was part of the group that organized some of the questions for the panel, is not present today, but she's in regards, and she of course contributes to organize these questions. So so far we have been talking about the factors that contribute to or help to be persistent, and goals, trying to have the values and the goals present. But I was wondering if maybe we can talk a little bit about how persistence can be cultivated, or is this something that can be cultivated?
I think Carolina asked if it's something that can be cultivated.
Or how can we cultivate it? You know, let's say in students. Should I can quickly give my answer is that I think the one thing to cultivating persistence requires somebody to have thick skin to certain things, be able to accept failure, and know how to learn from your mistakes, to pick up, to improve on those mistakes and go forward in the future. Or even if they're not your mistakes, other people's mistakes, knowing how to get around those obstacles. And through this rejections or failures or other things that are going on, if you can learn how to overcome those, then you can learn how to maintain that persistence to keep moving on.
Does that make sense, Carolina? Renetta and Kenny, anything to add to Erich's comments?
I was just going to say that I learned early on that it's important to count the small victories. So many times we look toward the big goals and we think that if we don't make it to those big goals, it's just hard to continue on. So every little thing you should celebrate. You should recognize the work that it took to get there. If it's something where you're celebrating in the middle of the week because you finished teaching a couple of classes, you ran a couple of experiments, some of them didn't work, but you tried again, and you're just saying, I'm going to look toward coming back tomorrow to see what happens the next day. You develop persistence bit by bit, just sort of little tiny victories. And as you go and you recognize that the day-to-day things that you can move toward the next day and into the next week and then the next month, then over time, I think you begin to develop a lens and a view that's going to help for some of those bigger things that you're going to need more strength for later. So in terms of cultivating your persistence, it's just those little things, piece by piece, bit by bit, being proud of them, being proud of yourself, encouraging yourself, being within a community where others encourage you, and just make sure that those little things are celebrated.
I totally agree. Those are the points I was going to make. Community is key. So we have these notions in science, actually in America, because we have a kind of hyper notion of the individual. Nobody makes it in life by themselves, right? It's not what happens, right? If nothing else, somebody birthed you and changed your diapers for a few years. You got 2 little kids. You might hear them screaming in the background because it's bedtime. But like we don't make it by ourselves. And so you have to speak to yourself, and you have people who can speak to you. You were not doing it. At the end of grad school, there's a gospel song, "Encourage Yourself" by Donald Lawrence, that I literally be in the gym, like on the elliptical, raising my hands, because I just got to make it. And people probably thought I was crazy, but I made it. And then when I told people I was losing it, then they could speak back to me what I couldn't speak to myself. And so I think community is key, and recognizing that a lot of life is overcoming failure and hardship, much like my toddler. So yeah, learning, community.
And can I just add something?
Yes, of course.
To just sort of build on to that? Kenny said something so important. He said, people don't do this by themselves. And so often when we are sort of the only ones in the group, or the only ones in the lab, in our department, or when we feel like we're representing our family, our community, we sort of feel like we have to, wave the flag, hold the banner to say, yes, I can do this, and I'm going to go forth and conquer. And you can, but what a lot of people forget, particularly in our communities, is that in other communities, people are working together. You may not see them working together. You may not necessarily notice that they are, or maybe you do, but you have to know that either, if you're not going to connect with the community that's there, then find a community to connect to. Don't ever think that you're doing this by yourself. And for those of you who have publications already, you know that when we're doing science, we're working together, we're collaborating, we're learning from one another, we're growing from one another's ideas and sharing them. And so making sure that you're connected to others is incredibly important. And again, if there's not an opportunity to develop very, very strong bonds within your department, then have other people in other departments with whom you can develop strong bonds. And I think it's also important to remember that some people think that developing a bond with your colleague means that you have to be their best friend. And that's not necessarily true. You can have a nice professional collegial relationship with the people in your lab or the people in your group. If it develops into a stronger friendship, that's fantastic and wonderful. If it doesn't, you can still have a nice collegial or professional relationship with them, and that's okay. And then after grad school, you may or may not see them again or connect with them, but you still have a professional relationship. Some people think if we're not best friends, then it's nothing, one or the other. And that's not true. So you want to make sure that you're having different kinds of relationships and connections throughout.
And just, sorry, I'm gonna build on that.
Go ahead.
The connections are really important, both internal. So these kind of internal community pieces are really important. It's equally important to make sure that you're connecting back to the broader scientific community, right? So most of science is driven by white men, and that's not a disparagement. That's just a empiric reality. Categories. And so you be connected with our white brothers, our white sisters, our Asian sisters, in addition to within the community. And yeah, there's more work that you have to do, but that's what it is, right? I said earlier, you have to be twice as good for half the credit. And we see that in lots of spheres, political and otherwise, scientific. So I just want to just encourage you to do that. And really, to the point that Erich made earlier, like, and I think, you see this fairly, and there's like a gender thing with it too, whereas men, and I count myself in this number, like if you see there's 10 qualifications, literally for jobs, I'm like, okay, I have 3 of them, I'm going to go for it and let them tell me no. Whereas oftentimes women, especially women of color, will say, I only have 9 of the 10, I can't possibly do it. And so like, don't do that, right? Like, go for it, because you only, actually I'll text that. I wrote something in Science Careers a few years ago, and the last bit of it was go for it. My mother would always say, never self-eliminate. Let them tell you no. So I just keep going for things, and people keep telling me yes. So I'm going to just keep going, go for it as long as it happens, right? Because, like, I don't know. I'm a AAAS fellow. I hadn't done this. I'm going to write this paper because I have things I need to say. And then people cite the paper. And then I'm a program officer at NIH, and I manage $30 million of funds. And I can shape national, right? Like, and I'm not even 35 years old, right? And I'm just like doing it because I'm like, people just let me keep doing it. So I'm just gonna keep going, right? And so I don't say that to say anything other than like, I didn't have a grand plan for this when I was in grad school. I just kept pursuing the things that I thought were important and being clear that you need to listen to people, because I'm very clear on what my limitations are, but also I'm clear that I do have something to contribute. And so I just want to go for it, and don't do the thing that I see my sisters do so much, which is take yourselves out. You're qualified enough, so go for it.
Yes. I wanted to comment on something that Renetta said. I think one of the most valuable lessons I learned in graduate school, it's all about the small victories. But I think on the other hand, and particularly relevant for many of us today, is it's, for me at least, to be persistent and to become more perseverant and resilient. For me, it's been really, really important to recognize when I am just too traumatized to do anything. I'm too traumatized to science because, there's members of your community that are being murdered because of the color of their skin, or are being hosed because they're trying to protect the right to water, or a hurricane is barreling down on your people and you can't communicate with them. I mean, it's important to be able to recognize those days and to give yourself the time and the space, be it a day, be it a few hours, whatever it is, to take care of yourself. Because if you push yourself to the point where you're like, no, I must keep going. I've been trying to write a grant today, and I woke up this morning at 4 because I was so anxious I couldn't sleep, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna write. But by 2 o'clock, I was like, I can't think straight. So am I gonna try to do something? No, I'm just gonna wait until it's time to connect to this conversation, and then you're all gonna give me life, and I'm gonna be fine. And so I think that's something that's really important to recognize and to keep in mind. Self-care and recognizing when you're too traumatized to science, and taking the space to take care of yourself.
Yes, 1,000%. I did some blogging for Scientific American, and I wrote a piece called Diversity in STEM. I literally wrote that the day, it was the weekend after Mike Brown was shot, and sat out in the street for 4 hours, and nobody at my workplace was talking about it. And so I'm like, except for my one other black colleague. And so then like I was mad all weekend, and I was mad that I'm trying to get people options like, man, the news is just really hard. People like, la, 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 look at the weather. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go and just do something that's helpful. And that's gotten some track. So again, you're humans, right? We're humans. We sometimes have this like, I'm a scientist, like you're a human who does science and does many other things. And no matter what your vocation, you'll still be a human. So take care of yourself as human. And, you know, yeah, that's all.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to also say, and this sort of goes back to the champions and mentors, one of the roles that I have played institutionally is sort of being the conduit, the translator, if you will, to let people know who don't understand sometimes what different kinds of tragedies, how they're affecting students if they don't affect those professors. So I've had professors who have not understood certain things that are happening in communities. And so I have taken it upon myself to explain it so that students don't have to necessarily be the ones who are trying to explain why they need to go home, or why they need to take some time off, or why they need to focus on a particular issue for a while, or do self-care, as was mentioned earlier. And so the interesting thing is I have seen faculty come around. So there have been some faculty over time who have been in the past, I would say, they didn't understand, they had certain levels of privilege and just sort of never thought about other things that affected other communities. But it wasn't until either we took them to different places. So I've taken people to different, neighborhoods and so forth, had them involved in conferences where they have had to sit and listen to people talk about things that are happening in the community. And for them, particularly if they were white males, very different kind of scenario when they are a minority in the group because they're at a conference where there are people from very diverse backgrounds, and then all of a sudden they're in this community and they're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I don't know how I should act or react in this kind of situation. But one the other thing I put in the chat is to make sure that you know what kind of healthy out you need. So I think that everybody should know what their self-care mechanism is. What do you need to do? What's going to be healthy for you? Where do you go? What kinds of things do you do when you just need to drop it and just go and do something else? For some people, it's go home. For some people, it's go and be with friends. Some people say they go to the gym, go to a place of worship. Some people just say, I just need to take a nap. Let me just take a nap and sleep for a while and eat my favorite food for just a little while, or talk to friends and just put the work away for a little while. So just know what those healthy outs are so that you can get to it and then get back when you're ready. And I'll let Eric go because I know he's had his hand up.
No, it's okay. I thought I was trying to time myself at the end. No, I actually, Renetta, I agree with everything you just said. And just as an example, I dance at least 2 to 3 times a week, and I schedule it into my schedule because you often find your experiments will never end. So to manage that persistence that, Carolina was getting at the very beginning, actually put it into your schedules, and that way you find it'll be helpful to you. So salsa dancing for now.
And one other thing, I'm gonna go real soon, but I'm this is not to evangelize. I'm a Christian, go to church, all for the Lord. So I find the practice of Sabbath very helpful. And so whether or not that's your worldview, a day of rest is important. And I was walking around doing the gotta work all the time nonsense at grad school. And I was like, you know what? On the 7th day, the Lord rested. And I'm not getting into the theology days, but I'm like, Genesis 1, setting the foundation of the universe, you work and then you rest. So that's foundational to how my worldview says the universe is supposed to work. work and rest. And I'm like, if the Lord can rest from setting the foundation of the universe, how much more can I rest from doing this little PhD? And it's really scary, but just like orient your life that you're not going to work all the time. And I became way more productive. I was like, I'm going to work 9 to 6, Monday to Friday. If something has to happen, that's fine. But my default is that when grad school, and I got infinitely more productive. So I wasn't Facebooking in lab. I was like, I'm being lab, I'm going to be in lab, and I'm going to live my life and do it, right? Again, know your environment, know your space, but you got to do these sorts of things. And I mean, more recently, I've just done no internet on Sundays because I'm like, and like literally rest. So like, don't email. Because if people need to get a hold of you, they won't email you. They have your number. They will find you if it's a real emergency, right? And I just think everybody needs to chill out a little bit. I don't do the internet on Sunday. Like, personally, none of it. I'm just like, it's fine. I'm just going to live my life, be my Lord and my family, call the day. I'll re-engage the world tomorrow. So taking time for self is important. On that note, I have a toddler that needs a bath and needs to go to sleep. So I'm happy to answer any additional questions, and I misread because my life's I misread it. I thought we were going to 8. So I don't need to go. They have my contact info, so feel free to send me, or you can holler at me on Twitter at Kenny Gibbs PhD. You're in great hands. And really, kudos to all y'all for coming out on a day like today. It's a hard day. Keep persevering. You know, I told one of my colleagues, I don't know, yeah, I said adelante, so like forward, because we just got to keep going, right? Like, life's hard, but forward. All right, take care, y'all.
Thank you, Kenny.
So I think Priscilla had a question for the panel.
Yes. So some of you touched on this already briefly, but I just want to make the question more specific. So was there a point during grad school that you did not want to persist anymore? And if so, what happened that made you change your mind? Or did you get help from someone specific, or did someone say something to you that you can relay to us so that it can help us in our journey?
Yes. No, I took my mic off because, or my mute off because I was like, yes. So just to put it in perspective, I got my PhD in 1999. Okay, so it's been a while, but there were several times along the journey when I wanted to quit, and mostly because I just didn't think I was good enough. You know, I mean, I was smart in high school, and then got to college and struggled a little bit, and got to grad school and was like, good gracious, all these brilliant people, I'm never going to get a PhD. How is this ever going to work? And I struggled for every little thing, you know, every A and B and a couple of C's. And then I had to get more A's in the independent study to counteract the C's to make sure that I had B's, and then talk to professors to make sure that I was doing right in the research and say, well, at least I can do the research well. So then trying to overprove that I could do the research. I'm one of those people who failed my qualifiers the first time. I failed my qualifiers, and I remember coming home and literally throwing myself on the bed and saying, I'm done. I can't do this. I'm not going to do it. I'm not smart enough. Luckily, I had friends and people who would say, you've come this far, you can't stop now. And, you know, talk to them, see if, does this mean you're getting kicked out? They would ask, well, does this mean you're getting kicked out? Like, no, I have another chance, but I don't know. I'm not going to do it. It's like, no, you take all your chances. You keep on going, and, you know, you don't leave until they tell you you have to. And even then, see if there's something else that can be done. And so that was sort of the mantra. Talk about gets back to persistence, right? That was sort of the mantra that I took. And I think that when it came, I ended up switching departments for my PhD. So I finished the master's in electrical engineering. For the PhD, I went to speech science because I wanted to do some things that were related to vocal pathology and connecting vocal pathology to speech recognition, but I wanted to do it in a communication science department. So I did it in a communication sciences department. And it was interesting because I had to take quals there too, but in a different way. Those quals, I had to take 3 of them, 8 hours, where they just sat you in a room and they gave you a question. You just had to write for 8 hours straight. And you had to know all of the background literature. I trained for that. I said, I'm going to do well on this. I trained for it 6 months in advance. I would take books and papers, piles of journal papers, to Barnes & Noble every day and I would read them, and I would just sort of filter them down, and I would get to the point where I would leave a paper home every day until I got to the point where I could sit and write for 8 hours without any journal papers and just know all that stuff off the top of my head. And so I trained for it like I was training for a marathon. And even then, I still failed one of the 3 quals. I was devastated until I talked to other people in the department and found out that there was a trend, a certain professor who always failed everybody on this particular thing. And so then once I learned that there was a departmental culture and that other people were failing too, and I saw other people who didn't look like me who would walk out of a room with a tear in their eye, and I was like, oh, okay, it's not just me. I'm not the only one who, you know, has a tear every now and then. And the interesting thing in my experience, I had never seen anyone who wasn't from my background or an underrepresented background cry, literally. That it hadn't been my experience until then. And people were really vulnerable. And once, because we had sort of broken down some of those barriers, and then we said, okay, we're going to do this. We're in it together. But I suddenly felt like, oh, other people are having issues too. I can do this. I'm going to get back up. What do I have to do in order to move forward? And so then I just found out I had to get the information. Sometimes we don't always know the information that we need to know that's there to help us. I went to everybody who had passed the qual in my department, and I sat down with them for at least an hour. And I said, what do I have to do to make sure that I pass this? This is what I've done. This is how I've answered this question. This is what I'm going to say for this. This is how I'm going to write that. And they schooled me. And they were of all races and backgrounds from different countries. And I said, I don't care which background, you're going to help me, and I'm going to help the next generation, you know, who comes after me. And that was my approach. And so from that point on, I said, okay, I'm going to take a community collective approach to this thing from here on out, because this is not going to be the last time that I'm going to have something that's not going to go well. And sure enough, you know, years later, I've had proposals that were rejected. We were talking about that before. I've had papers that were rejected. You have to revise and resubmit. And this experience that you have in grad school, resistance, persistence, getting up, doing it again. When you get a paper that's rejected, you might be upset, but you say, okay, I'm going to have to revise and resubmit it, but I need a healthy out right now. I need to take some time and just put it down and watch Netflix and, you know, get something good to eat and listen to some good music, and I'll get back to this in a couple days. But I just need to chill for a little while and more in the process, more in the loss, and then move forward.
Okay, shall I say something for this? Yeah, very good question. In my particular case, well, I'm in Renetta's camp. I actually failed my qualifications as well for a neuroscience major here at Rockefeller when I was a graduate student, and I had to take it again. I would say that even at that time and so forth, I was one of those persons who didn't have the feeling, okay, I can't do this, I'm going to give up. I sometimes had the feeling, why am I not being able to do this the way I've seen others do it, and trying to figure that out. What did happen to me was my first 4 years of graduate school was a real struggle. I felt that even though I lived in New York City, I had come from Hunter College with this diverse environment of people I felt comfortable with. I came to Rockefeller University at the time, and I felt like I was in the middle of Europe. And it was just a different world. And the same thing when I went to, as a professor to Duke University, even more so. And it's the South, right? And so, so I felt that this was an isolating environment, and I started to have this imposter syndrome, do I belong here? And even some students, I remember here, when I left at a hot plate under the hood, you know, he wrote a letter to the dean's office saying that I don't feel safe with Erich in the lab because, implying I'm not qualified to be here and so forth. I'm here for a quota. At least that's what other students in the lab were saying he felt. And so, those are the things where I had to overcome this feeling, do I belong? And the only thing that overcame that for me was publications and success in my work. And publishing, at a consistent rate and making these discoveries that people can appreciate. That's washed a lot of that away. One more thing to add to that, though, there was a period of time during my postdoc years that I felt like, wow, this is really hard. I got to struggle. I got to make this really work. I felt like I was doing this more for survival than for the enjoyment, the pleasure of it. So in order to get rid of that, I discovered you just really have to fall in love with your work like you fall in love with your partner. All right? Don't get the partner jealous of your work. You got to be careful of that. All right? But once you really fall in love with your work, it doesn't become work anymore, even when it's hard. It becomes something that you're more passionate about, something that you love.
This is amazing. I was telling Kenny in the private chat that I feel, you know, I'm not religious personally, but I feel like I'm in my own church today. I'm like, just like, let's see. Does anybody else have a question or want to comment or share their own experiences with failure and how to overcome it?
I want to comment something. Today we had a orientation for new students in my school, and they were, you know, asking a graduate student from third year on what's the best thing you can say to them in order to success in classes and all that. And I told them, well, it's okay not to be okay first. It's okay to fail, and it's okay to have your free time. In my school, there's this typical thing that the professors tell the students to overwork if they want to succeed. But for some of them, that never work. And for me, what did work is to have enough time for me, enough time for my family, enough time for my friends, enough time to be in my church with my other family, and to be sometimes out of school. It's good to be out of school sometimes. Some of them, like I have my mentor, for example. He's good. He's a very good person. He likes, you know, everything I do. But sometimes if I fail, he said that I love to hike, for example, and he's like, "Oh, that's why that happens because you went to hike this weekend." And then I'm like, that doesn't have to, you know, doesn't have any relationship with that. And when I failed my second quarter, one section of my concentration classes for my qualificatory exams, he was like, "Oh, you should skip doing hike. You should skip being too much time outside the lab. You should study more." I'm like, I'm trying, but I'm not, you know, having any success in that class. So I'm persistent, but I'm not having results. So probably I should do something different. What I did different is to be outside the lab a little bit more. So when I came back, I will be more productive at the end. And as I said in the chat, I was telling them that even though I failed that class, I was the higher score in my qualificatory exams. And, you know, I passed the qualificatory exams once. So they were like, that gave me hope that we can do this. Because sometimes they want to put the PhD or any graduate program as something very difficult and something that any person, ex-person can do, but they have to be like superhuman, to have superpowers, to be super competitive, when in reality we are all humans and we need to fail, we need to have experience, we have families, we have issues. And that's the comment that I want to say.
All right, very good.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from you, the fellows, that want to share something? I wanted to share something, but I want to give you guys a chance before.
I wanted to just say
Go ahead, Angela.
So from what I'm hearing, imposter syndrome has a lot to do with not feeling competent enough to persist in grad school. And I think also the workload that we have as graduate students. I know this is not the topic of today's discussion, but we have two great scientists here, so I would like to know if you have just briefly some small tips that we can do daily to just stay on track and just keep that goal in front of us. And I know that some things work for one people, but not for others, but just what works for you.
Yes, can you hear me? It's a very strange feeling, and sometimes I think I'm over it, and then I discover it comes back. An example recently is that, you know, when I moved here to Rockefeller back last January from Duke University, so I was at Duke University for many years, and so I come back now as a professor, a full professor here, and discover that I'm the first, when I call it African American, they hired ever in their 117 years of existence. And so one hand that feels like, wow, okay, I should pat myself on the back and so forth, or you know, feel like I'm helping to lead the way for others. In another way, it feels like, do I really belong here? You know, like what happened and to them and to me and so forth. And so I think there's always that feeling, do you belong, that's going to always come back. And the little bit that I can tell you that overcomes it is just continue to pave the way to make your own success, washes it away. And that's the only way I found around it.
I'm going to share something that the president of my university talks about. His name is Freeman Hrabowski. He's a mathematician. And he always tells this story all the time about how when he was little, actually not, I think, I don't remember when he was little or later on, but he used to look in the mirror and he used to say, "Good morning, Dr. Hrabowski," when he was young. And sometimes things like that just help. And so I like the feeling of sort of projecting to what you will be in the future and seeing yourself as that. One of my colleagues, Dr. Autumn Reed, and I do an exercise with our grad students, and particularly our postdocs, called the aspirational CV. And the aspirational CV is an exercise where you write the CV that you want to have 5 years from now. And so when I have done that, even in my own career, I was writing things like, I wanted to become a professor. I wanted to work for UNESCO one day. I wanted to do all these different things. I wanted to have vice provost in my title. I wanted to do something that was going to connect work related to humanitarian engineering. And I found that as I did that, I started to put things in place to help those things to happen. It meant that I networked differently when I went to conferences. It meant that I started sharing some of my aspirations with others who were in positions of power to help it to happen. It meant that when I started looking at where I was going to publish, or if I wanted to do a presentation and there wasn't an opportunity, I would volunteer to do so. Say, well, do you need a presentation on that topic? Or would you like me to give a talk in this particular area? And I started that in grad school. I knew that I needed to work on my public speaking skills, and I went to my lab director and I said, I would like to give a presentation on my work. And I was just in the early stages. I had very few results. And so I did one of those, I call it toward papers, like toward the result of looking at, you know, A, B, and C. And I started doing that. And someone told me for every semester, you should have something to present. And every 6 months, you should update your CV. Long story short, for this aspirational CV, I started doing that, and I've been doing it for years and years and years. And interestingly enough, my position now is Associate Vice Provost of Strategic Initiatives, so it has changed. But I was invited by UNESCO to go to the UN to talk about women in STEM, and the UNESCO is sending me to Beijing next week to work on a project, and they said, and we'll be sending you 3 more times in the next 18 months. And so just writing what I wanted to do and talking to people about it and having them be champions and having them work for me, that has really helped to make a difference. So I would highly recommend that for you to think about what you want to do, write it out. You know, they used to say, make a plan, write it out, make it plain, right? And you want to make sure that then you share it with other people, because you never know when there might be an opportunity. And they'll say, Priscilla, yes, Priscilla Rodriguez, she's a wonderful student, or she is a great scientist. You want to make sure that you definitely have her in your group or have her in your panel, or you want to hire her if you have an opportunity. So you want to make sure that people know who you are, people have copies of your CV, etc. And that will also help with your STEM identity and help to quell some of those imposter syndrome characteristics.
I'll just say one sentence to add to that. I love that. The other thing I think to do that works for me is I usually find some others, you know, particularly white Americans, have a lower bar of what they expect my achievements will be. I set my own bar higher than theirs. And that's what I try to achieve. And if I can make that achievement, that also washes away these kinds of feelings.
Yeah. What is it that they say? Lord, give me the conference of a mediocre white man.
Yeah, I think we have heard some of these things in previous conversations that I think I want to echo. You know, the idea that it's really important to have an aspiration and a view of yourself, you know, a broader view of yourself. So that's why role models are so important. As we're having these conversations with all these people, you have access to these visions of who you could become. You know, you can use them as examples for these aspirational CVs. And then the idea that Erich just posed, you know, you've all had amazing achievements, amazing successes. You're doing PhDs in areas that, you know, people haven't explored before. So use those achievements as a source of confidence. You know, you've already achieved way more than you know. And sometimes it's important to remind ourselves that, you know, we're already here and we're here for a reason. And that can help a lot with these fears or insecurities as they come up, and they come up for everybody. All right, we might have time for one last question, or maybe a last parting comment.
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things. I think culturally, for many of us, it's really hard to own our achievements and to their own horns. And I think, you know, there's a fine line between bragging and really owning your awesome. So I think we all need to become comfortable with owning our awesome. And then becoming comfortable with our own aspirations. You know, Renetta wanted to go to the UN, and for, you know, an engineer and a scientist, it's like, what does an engineer do at the UN? Like, when you think about the United Nations, maybe that's not what you think about. You don't think about scientists, you don't think about engineers, but, you know, become comfortable with your aspirations. I mean, I can say for myself, like recently I've become more comfortable with my aspiration of being a scientist who creates social change and impact through science communication and education. And a few years ago, I would have been like, what? I'm going to create social impact? No way. No way. And so, you know, I think it's really important to own your awesome and to become comfortable with those aspirations so that it'd be easier to make them happen.
All right, Erich and Renetta, do you have any parting words that you want to leave the students with?
Yes, I would say that coming back to this topic of persistence and perseverance, that not everybody has the same path of how to do that, but I think those words in of itself are still necessary. And to know that if you follow some method, or if you learn, as Carolina was saying, you know, learn some way of how to be persistent, from others, from your mentors, from your friends, and so forth, that is a skill in and of itself. And that is a necessary skill to be successful in almost anything, or anything that's really challenging, like science. So I really think this is a very important and good topic, and something that I encourage all the students to go back over the recordings of this, or talk about it more from here on.
I think as a parting piece, just sort of connecting to what Erich just said, is also make sure that you're finding places to fill in any gaps that you're going to need to do well in your studies. It's interesting because I've had people who were some of my students, some who were athletes and some who were artists and so forth. And what I found was that they were not necessarily using the same skills that they were using in athletics and in their artistry with their science. In other words, they weren't putting the same type of either time or passion into it, or the piece about trying different things, studying, who the great well, that's not the right term I wanted, who are the people who were doing really well in the field, what did they do, reading the papers and the experiments and trying those kinds of things, and really becoming a true student of the work that you're doing. And one of the things I think that really helped me when I was in graduate school was to really, Erich mentioned this earlier, sort of fall in love with the work and why you were doing it. So I was doing work with speaker recognition and people with non-prototypical voice. And I really wanted to make sure that deaf talkers had an opportunity to use speech recognition systems. And so I was very driven to make sure that I could find out what the different frequencies were between how a system was working properly and what the differences were when you had various types of voice patterns. And I wanted to make sure that I was understanding that. So I went back and looked at people who had done the work many, many years ago, even early 1920s. I did a lot of work in phonetics and just really started to enjoy learning about the history of my work. And I think that was very helpful too. Sometimes learning about who was doing the work years ago and what your academic lineage is, sort of knowing some of that line, that academic descendant line, that can be helpful. But I know we're about to run out of time, so I was just going to say, if any of you will be at SOCNUS, I'm going to be at SOCNUS, and please feel free. I'm going to be doing the GEM Grad Lab for students who want to go to grad school. But if you are there and want to say hello, please say hello. If you're going to be at SREB, someone said not this year, but I think Diana was saying maybe not this year, or someone else was saying not this year. But if you're going to be at any of these conferences, or if we're going to be in the same place, or we can just stay in touch, Twitter, whatever, I'll be rooting you on. And I'm just, I'm so excited for all of you, because all of you, as I look here, you're all going to have doctor in front of your name, PhD after your name, very soon, within the next X years. And you're going to be doing great things. And then you're going to be on panels encouraging people. Some of you are already doing that. You're going to be writing and letting people know what they can do, and carrying these legacies forward so the next generation can come after you and continue to do great things. So I'm excited for all of you, and I just want to say congratulations for taking the journey. Please stay on the pathway. Please utilize all of your mentors and contacts, and in the meanwhile, please know that my thoughts and prayers are with all family and friends on the island. And if I can be of any help, please let me know in the future.
Erich and Renetta and Kenny in absence, thank you so much. Everybody, I hope you heard some good strategies that you can apply for yourselves. Remember, you started in grad school because you had a love for science, as Erich said, because you knew you have something to contribute. Hopefully these strategies will help you remember that mission and keep focused on that. And to our fellows in Puerto Rico, if you're watching this video offline, we're thinking about you, and hopefully we'll be in communication with you soon. Everybody, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
All
you,
right, you're
everyone.
welcome. Bye.
Bye.